a Labrador Retriever puppy and a retired racehorse. An unlikely friendship formed in the open fields of a rural farm. Everyone thought it was just a cute oddity that would fade as the dog matured. But what happened years later during a life-threatening crisis left everyone speechless. This incredible story of cross-species loyalty and the extraordinary connection between two different animals will challenge everything you thought you knew about animal relationships. Get ready for a journey that reveals how deep bonds can transcend species, language, and even logic itself. The day 8-week-old Max arrived at Callaway Farm was the day everything changed for Thunder, a retired thoroughbred racehorse with a troubled past. The Labrador Retriever puppy, all paws and floppy ears, had been purchased by James Callaway to help manage the small herd of cattle on their Montana property. Sophie Callaway, James's 12-year-old daughter, was the first to notice something unusual. While completing her morning chores, she found Max, not in his designated sleeping area, but curled up in Thunder's stall, the massive horse standing protectively over the puppy. "Dad," she called out, concerned. "Thunder's got Max in his stall." James rushed over, expecting the worst. Thunder had been a difficult rescue, a once-celebrated racehorse with an impressive track record until an injury ended his career. The thoroughbred had developed a reputation for being unpredictable and aggressive around other animals. But what James saw stopped him in his tracks. Thunder, who typically pinned his ears back when anyone approached his stall, stood calmly, as the Labrador Retriever puppy playfully nipped at his fetlocks. The horse lowered his head, occasionally gently nudging the puppy with his nose. "I've never seen anything like it," James muttered. Sophie's eyes widened. "Can they stay together, please?" James hesitated, but decided, "We'll supervise, but at the first sign of trouble, they're separated." Over the following weeks, the unlikely pair became inseparable. Max would follow Thunder around his paddock, sleeping in the sun while the horse grazed. When Max tired, Thunder would stop and wait, seeming to understand the puppy's limitations. Most surprising was the change in Thunder. The horse that had arrived with a warning label about his temperament now nickered softly when he saw the family approach. The permanent crease between his eyes, a sign of his chronic stress, began to soften. Dr. Martinez, who came for Thunder's checkup, was astonished. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," she advised. "I haven't seen him this relaxed since before his racing injury." James nodded toward Max. "I think the credit goes to him." Dr. Martinez observed thoughtfully. "Animals can form unexpected bonds, especially when they're both looking for something missing in their lives. What that something might be, no one could say for certain, but as summer turned to fall, the Labrador Retriever puppy and the ex-racehorse had formed a connection that defied conventional understanding. By Max's first birthday, he had grown. Into his sturdy frame, his puppy fluff replaced by the sleek golden coat of a Labrador Retriever. He'd also begun his training with the cattle, showing natural talent for herding. Thunder had thrived under the consistent companionship. His coat gleamed with health, and the severe limp from his old racing injury had improved. Most remarkably, he'd become a favorite among visitors to the farm, the same horse that once came with warnings. One crisp autumn morning, Sophie was filming the pair for her science project. Max raced circles around Thunder in the large paddock, occasionally stopping to playfully bark at the horse. Thunder responded by pawing the ground and tossing his head, behaviors Sophie had never observed when he interacted with other horses. "It's like they've developed their own language," Sophie narrated. "Max doesn't herd Thunder the way he does the cattle, and Thunder is more playful with Max than with anyone else." James watched from the fence. "They're good for each other," he acknowledged. "But don't forget, Max has a job to do." Despite James's concerns, the Labrador Retriever proved remarkably capable of balancing his duties with his friendship. He would work tirelessly with the cattle during the day, then spend evenings in or near Thunder's stall. Their unusual bond became something of a local legend. Neighboring farmers would stop by to see those two odd friends. Children from nearby properties begged their parents to visit, where Sophie would proudly give tours. Dr. Martinez began bringing veterinary students to observe the pair. Thunder lowers his head when he wants Max's attention, she would explain, and notice how Max always approaches from Thunder's front left side. He's learned that's where Thunder can see him best. But it was during an unexpected spring storm that the depth of their connection truly revealed itself. Thunder, like many horses, became agitated during thunderstorms, his racing heart and panicked movements putting him at risk of injury. This particular evening, James rushed to the barn with Thunder's medication only to find Max already in the stall, pressed against Thunder's legs. The massive horse stood still, his head lowered, focusing entirely on the dog below him. As lightning flashed and thunder rumbled overhead, Max leaned more firmly against Thunder's legs. The horse remained calm, his ears moving between the sounds. Of the storm and his canine companion, "I'll be damned," James whispered, tucking the sedative back into his pocket and quietly backing away. What James didn't realize then was that this was merely a preview of a much more significant storm heading their way. The summer of Max's second year brought drought to Montana. Creek beds dried up, grass withered in the fields, and farmers watched, the sky with increasing desperation. Max had matured into an exceptional working dog. His bond with Thunder remained strong, though their interactions had evolved into a more mature companionship, resting together in the shade, Thunder grazing while Max kept watch. It was during a scorching day in late July that disaster struck. Sophie had taken Thunder for a gentle ride along the property's perimeter. Max typically accompanied them, but today he'd remained with James, helping move cattle. Sophie and Thunder were nearly a mile from the house when they smelled smoke. Orange flames licked up the dry brush on the hillside, moving quickly with a hot wind. Sophie turned Thunder toward home, her heart racing as she realized they were directly in the wildfire's path. Back at the farm, James noticed the smoke and immediately thought of his daughter. He called her cell phone repeatedly, getting no answer. He jumped into his truck, planning to drive until he found them. Max, however, had other ideas. The Labrador Retriever had been pacing anxiously, nose in the air. When James headed for his truck, Max began barking insistently, running toward the eastern trail, a different direction than James had planned to search. "Not now, Max," James called. The dog's barking intensified. He ran back to James, tugged at his pant leg, then raced again toward the eastern trail, his message unmistakable. "Follow me." James hesitated briefly before following Max. The dog raced ahead, periodically stopping to ensure James kept pace, leading him through a seldom-used shortcut. Meanwhile, Sophie faced a terrifying decision. The main trail home was now blocked by flames. With limited options, Sophie guided Thunder toward a dried creek bed. It wasn't much, but the exposed rocks and sand might offer some protection. "It's okay, boy," she soothed, though her voice trembled. Thunder's ears flicked back at her voice, but his attention remained fixed on something in the distance. He nickered softly, then louder, an urgent sound Sophie had never heard before. That's when they heard Max's distinctive bark, somehow audible over the fire's approaching roar. Seconds later, the Labrador Retriever appeared on a ridge above them, with James close behind. Max raced down to them, circling Thunder and Sophie before taking off again, clearly expecting them to follow. "He found a way around the fire," James called. "Follow him now." Without hesitation, Sophie turned Thunder in Max's direction. The horse followed the dog with complete trust. Max led them through a narrow passage between two rocky outcroppings, a route that bypassed the worst of the fire. 20 minutes later, they emerged safely, the farm visible in the distance. Behind them, fire crews had begun arriving to battle the blaze. That evening, the family gathered in Thunder's stall. The horse stood quietly, occasionally lowering his head to nudge Max, who hadn't left his side since their return. How did Max know where to find us? Sophie wondered, her voice still raspy from smoke. James shook his head in amazement. And how did he know that passage existed? They had no answers, only gratitude for the extraordinary dog who had somehow known exactly what to do in a crisis. Autumn arrived, bringing cool relief after the traumatic summer. The wildfire had spared the Callaway Farm but left its mark on the landscape and the family. Sophie, previously fearless on her rides with Thunder, now hesitated at the property's boundaries. Max had become something of a local hero after the fire. The story of his rescue spread throughout the community, with the local newspaper featuring a front-page photo of the Labrador Retriever standing proudly beside Thunder and Sophie. Dr. Martinez was fascinated by the behavior she observed during her post-fire visit. Their connection has evolved, she noted, watching Max carefully monitor Thunder's examination. It's not just companionship anymore. They're actively communicating and problem-solving together. James had noticed it too. While moving cattle, recently Max had encountered a particularly stubborn steer. After several unsuccessful attempts, the Labrador Retriever had raced to Thunder's paddock, barked specifically at him, then returned with the horse following behind. Thunder's mere presence had been enough to motivate the steer to move. It's like they're a team now, Sophie observed. Max knows when he needs Thunder's help. October brought an unexpected visitor. Michael Brandon, a researcher from the university's Animal Behavior Department, who had read about Max and Thunder's relationship. Cross-species cooperative behavior exists in nature, he explained, but it typically develops through necessity in the wild or through careful training in captivity. What makes your animals remarkable is that they've developed this cooperative relationship spontaneously. Michael requested permission to observe the pair as part of a study. James hesitated, but Sophie's enthusiasm ultimately convinced him. The researcher set up cameras around the property and spent several days each week documenting interactions between Max and Thunder. What he captured amazed even him. They've developed at least 15 distinct communicative behaviors, Michael reported, after a month. Max uses different barks and body positions to convey specific messages to Thunder, and Thunder responds with ear positions and movements that Max clearly understands. Most intriguing was their problem-solving ability. When Michael set up experimental challenges, placing Thunder's favorite apple treat where the horse couldn't reach it, Max would assess the situation and retrieve it for him. Conversely, when Max's ball rolled under the barn door into a space too narrow for him, Thunder would use his hoof to carefully push it back out. They're not just friends, Michael concluded. They've developed a mutually beneficial relationship, where each compensates for the other's physical limitations. As fascinating as these observations were, they couldn't prepare the Callaways for what happened when a powerful early-season blizzard swept across the region with little warning. The Two-Eyed blizzard hit with unexpected ferocity. James had moved the cattle to sheltered pens and made sure all animals had adequate protection, but as night fell and temperatures plummeted, he realized with alarm that Max was missing. The dog had been present during afternoon chores, but hadn't come in for his evening meal. He's probably in the barn with Thunder, Sophie suggested, though worry creased her forehead. James bundled up and fought his way through thickening snow to the barn, calling for Max. Thunder greeted him with an anxious whicker, alone in his stall, no sign of the Labrador Retriever. A quick search of the nearby buildings yielded nothing. By now, the storm had intensified, winds howling around the farmhouse as the family gathered to form a search plan. That's when they heard Thunder's frantic neighing from the barn, followed by the sound of splintering wood. James ran back out. To find Thunder had broken through his stall door, something the horse had never done before. The thoroughbred paced in agitation, repeatedly approaching James, then moving toward the barn door, his intent unmistakable. He wants us to follow him, Sophie realized, pulling on her snow boots. Absolutely not, James objected. It's a whiteout there. We wait until morning. But Dad, Sophie pleaded. "What if Max is hurt? We can follow Thunder a little way. If it gets too dangerous, we'll come back." The desperation in Thunder's behavior convinced James. Securing a rope to Thunder's halter and another to Sophie so they wouldn't lose each other in the blinding snow, he reluctantly agreed to follow the horse, but only for a short distance. Thunder moved purposefully through the storm, seeming unaffected by the stinging snow and wind that forced James and Sophie to keep their heads down. 20 minutes into their trek, James was about to insist they turn back when Thunder suddenly stopped, pawing urgently at a snowdrift beside the creek bed. James brushed away snow to reveal Max's still form, half submerged in the partially frozen water. The Labrador Retriever had apparently fallen through thin ice and managed to drag himself partially onto the bank before his strength gave out. His body was dangerously cold, his breathing shallow. James lifted Max, wrapping him in his own coat, while Sophie covered Thunder in a blanket they'd brought. The journey back to the farm seemed interminable, but Thunder never wavered, breaking a path through deepening snow to lead them home. Once inside, James and Sophie worked frantically to warm Max, gradually following emergency instructions from Dr. Martinez over the phone as the blizzard made a house call impossible. Throughout the night, Thunder remained by the farmhouse window, occasionally nickering softly as if checking on Max's progress. By morning, Max had stabilized, though he remained weak. As Dr. Martinez explained when she finally reached them, if he'd been out there even an hour longer, we would have lost him. The question remained: how had Thunder known where to find Max? Spring came to Callaway Farm with a vibrancy that seemed to wash away the memories of both fire and blizzard. Max had fully recovered, though he now approached the creek with noticeably more caution. Thunder had become something of a celebrity in veterinary circles after Michael's research was published in a prestigious animal behavior journal. "The implications are fascinating," Dr. Martinez explained during a visit. "We've always known animals can form cross-species attachments, but the level of communication and problem-solving these two demonstrate challenges our understanding of animal cognition." James remained practical despite the academic interest. "They're still just a farm dog and a retired racehorse to me," he insisted, though his voice held unmistakable pride. The bond between Max and Thunder had deepened through their mutual rescues. The Labrador Retriever now slept in Thunder's stall most nights, and the horse grew visibly anxious when Max went on longer herding missions without him. One crisp April morning, a representative from a national animal documentary series arrived at the farm, hoping to feature the remarkable pair in an upcoming episode. Sophie, now 14 and considering a future in veterinary medicine, enthusiastically showed the film crew around. "They communicate in ways we're still learning to understand," she explained, leading them to the paddock where Max and Thunder were enjoying the spring sunshine. As if to demonstrate her point, Max suddenly sat upright, his ears perked in high, alert. Thunder, who had been grazing peacefully, immediately raised his head, focusing in the same direction. Before anyone could react, both animals were racing toward the far fence line where the cattle grazed. James grabbed binoculars from his truck and scanned the distant field. "The new calf," he said urgently. "It's stuck in the mud by the pond." The film crew followed as James and Sophie rushed to the scene in the farm's ATV. By the time they arrived, Max was already in the shallow pond, attempting to reach the struggling calf, who had wandered into the boggy spring mud and couldn't free itself. Thunder stood at the pond's edge, whinnying encouragement, but wisely not entering the mud himself. Max made several attempts to reach the calf, but couldn't get close enough without risking getting stuck himself. What happened next left even James speechless. After seemingly conferring with Thunder through a series of barks and head movements, Max returned to shore. Thunder lowered himself to a kneeling position, something horses rarely do voluntarily. Max grabbed a coil of rope that James had left on a nearby fence post days earlier and dragged it to Thunder, who took one end in his teeth. Max, with the other end of the rope in his mouth, cautiously made his way back toward the calf. The calf, exhausted from struggling, allowed Max to loop the rope around its neck. Once secure, Max returned to shore, and Thunder, now standing, began backing up, using his substantial weight and strength to pull the calf free from the mud's suction. By the time James and Sophie reached them, the calf was safely on solid ground, muddy but unharmed. The documentary director was ecstatic. "We got it all on camera. That was the most extraordinary display of animal cooperation I've ever witnessed." But James and Sophie were too busy processing what they'd just seen to respond. This wasn't just animal friendship or even simple cooperation. This was complex problem-solving that required understanding tools, physics, and teamwork. 5 years later, Callaway Farm had transformed. What began as a modest cattle operation had evolved into the Callaway Animal Behavior Center, where researchers, veterinarians, and animal enthusiasts came to observe and learn from the remarkable relationship between a Labrador Retriever and a thoroughbred horse. Max, now 7 and in his prime, and Thunder, a dignified 20 years old, remained the heart of the center. The documentary featuring their pond rescue had gone viral, bringing attention and research grants that allowed James to expand the property and build proper facilities for visitors and students. Sophie, home from her first year of veterinary school, led tours and assisted with the research projects that continued to document the evolving communication between the unlikely friends. What began as companionship has developed into something science still struggles to categorize, she explained to a group of visiting students. They've created over 30 distinct signals between them, and they continue to develop new ones. And Thunder demonstrated this as they moved around their spacious paddock, the Labrador Retriever using subtle head movements and specific bark patterns that the horse clearly understood and responded to with equally deliberate gestures. Dr. Martinez, now a regular collaborator at the center, had documented how their problem-solving abilities continued to evolve. They don't just compensate for each other's physical limitations anymore, she noted. They anticipate problems and work together to solve them before they become critical. James, who had initially been the most skeptical about the significance of their bond, had become one of its strongest advocates. "These animals have taught us to question our assumptions about the limits of animal intelligence and communication," he told a journalist from a prestigious science magazine. "What they share isn't just friendship. It's a legitimate language they've created together." The most remarkable aspect wasn't just that Max and Thunder had formed this extraordinary bond, but how it continued to deepen and evolve. When Max suffered a temporary leg injury, Thunder adapted his movement patterns to accommodate his friend's limited mobility. When Thunder developed arthritis in his advancing years, Max learned to herd the cattle with less running and more strategic positioning to reduce Thunder's need to move quickly. "They're constantly learning from each other," Sophie observed, "and teaching us if we're willing to listen." As sunset painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Max and Thunder stood together on a hill overlooking the farm, silhouetted against the dramatic backdrop. The Labrador Retriever leaned gently against the horse's leg, while Thunder lowered his head to rest briefly against Max's back, a gesture of affection they had shared since the beginning. Their story had begun with a puppy seeking warmth and a troubled horse finding purpose. It had evolved into a partnership that challenged scientific understanding and touched the hearts of millions. But for Max and Thunder, it was simpler. They had found in each other exactly what they needed, bridging the gap between their species through a language of loyalty, trust, and unwavering friendship. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who appreciates the extraordinary bonds animals can form and help us spread messages of connection that transcend the boundaries we too often assume cannot be crossed.